Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Robert Parker, Councillor Robert Parker, and I'm the chair of the board. Can I welcome all members and officers in attendance today? The audio feed of the meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website. I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who are listening to our meeting online today. Anyone invited to speak during today's meeting should unmute their microphone and switch on their camera. Could you turn off your camera and microphone when not participating? If you want to speak, please use the chat function and type "speak" as a comment. All officers and members are welcome to use the chat function, and requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chair, Councillor Ray Wotton. Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services and Statutory Scrutiny Officer, will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun. If you experience any IT issues during the meeting, please end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided. If you experience connectivity issues while speaking, please turn your camera off, as this may help. If you continue to experience IT issues, please contact Simon Firth, IT engineer, for assistance. Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting or are returning to the meeting indicate using the chat function? Officers don't need to do so. Okay, if we could move to the order of proceedings, can I begin by asking Nick Harrison, Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members in attendance at the meeting today?
Thank you, Chairman. Morning. Councillor Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Adams.
Present.
Councillor Mrs Brockway.
Present.
Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Kendrick.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Macy.
Present.
Councillor Marfleet.
He's unavoidably detained. He can't get here, I'm afraid, Chairman. Apologies, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Newton. Councillor Mrs Newton. Councillor Oxby.
Present.
Councillor Pepper.
Present.
Councillor Strangle.
Present.
Other members, Mrs Machin.
Present.
Reverend Philip Johnson. Other councillors, Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Young. Councillor Young.
Present.
Councillor Boothroyd.
Present.
Councillor Whittington.
Present.
And Councillor Corey as an observer.
I'm sorry, it's Councillor Newton. I couldn't get a connection when you called my name, but I can hear you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Corey as an observer.
Thank you. Present.
Thank you. That's all, Chairman.
Thank you. If we could move to the agenda for today's meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence replacement members. Yeah, declarations to item 2,
Chairman.
declarations. Yes, sorry.
Chairman, just going back, our apologies for absence. We've got apology from Councillor Mrs Wendy Bokett, for whom Councillor Oxby is acting as a replacement member. And we've also got an apology from Miss Alexia, Parent Governor Representative.
Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of council of interest. As usual, if any member would like to declare an interest, can you please indicate in the chat now by typing "speak". Councillor Wotton, do we have any members who would like to declare an interest?
There are none showing, Chairman.
Thank you.
None. Sorry.
Okay. If we go to item 3 then, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of September 2020. As usual, this item is to confirm and sign the minutes from the meeting of the board on the 24th of September as a true record. If we just go through the paper, page 5, does anybody want to raise anything about that page and go through them one at a time. Page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, and page 12. So, nobody's raised anything. So, do I have a proposer and a seconder on the minutes?
Chairman, how to propose that as a true record of the meeting?
Thank you.
Happy to second that, Chairman. Councillor Macy.
That's kind of you. Thank you, Carl. Okay, so we've got a proposer and a seconder for the minutes. If we vote, remember you're voting on whether you agree that the minutes are a true record. Indications? Okay. Can I ask all the members to turn on their cameras? Okay. And indicate. I can't see any people voting against. So those in favour have raised their hands. Those against now, please can you raise your hand? Nobody.
Councillor Oxbee has abstained, Chairman.
Thank you. I think, Nick, you're going to announce the results of the vote.
Yes, it was just one abstention from Councillor Oxbee. The rest were in agreement with the minutes.
That's lovely. Thank you. That's the minutes agreed. Can you turn on your cameras unless you turn off your cameras unless you're going to speak? Item 4 is announcements of the myself, executive councillors, and chief officers. If I could begin. Following the last meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, I attended the meeting of the executive on the 6th of October and presented the comments from the board on the corporate plan performance framework and the performance reporting against the council business plan for last year for quarter 4. I highlighted the board's congratulations in relation to the quarter 4 performance and for the performance framework. I also highlighted there's a number of criteria in the support in high aspirations ambition would only be reported annually, and that we requested that consideration be given to ways in which this ambition could be monitored on a quarterly basis to show current performance. Further to my announcement at the last meeting about the Scrutiny Panel A, which was conducting a short review of developer contributions, I'm pleased to report that Scrutiny Panel held its first meeting in mid-October and will meet again at the start and end of November. It's proposed that the panel will present its final draft report to the board at our December meeting. Okay, so that's my contribution. Turning to executive councillor announcements, any executive councillors wanting to make a contribution? Councillor Hill, starting with yourself.
No, okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Young.
No, not for the moment, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Chief Officer, starting with the Chief Executive, Debbie Barnes. Debbie, have you got any announcements that you want to make?
Good morning. Thank you very much. I just really wanted to update the committee that we were notified of the last tranche of funding around the COVID pandemic. Obviously, it links into the first paper, but just to confirm that Lincolnshire County Council was awarded just slightly over £4 million in the most recent tranche. Clearly, we're working with the service areas at the moment to look at how that funding can be most effective, but we were only notified very recently.
Thank you. Chief Officer announcements. James Drury.
No, nothing for me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew Cookham. Silence.
Sorry, Chair. Andrew's given his apologies for today.
Thank you. We'll note that. Great. Moving on to item 5, which is the consideration of call-ins. Nick, are there any call-ins to consider?
None, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor calls for action. Do we have to consider any councillor calls for action, Nick?
No, we don't. None of those.
Thank you. Okay, so we move to the first of 4 substantial items on the agenda. The first one is COVID-19 recovery update. As you know, this sets out an update on the recovery since the last report was received back in August. I'd like to welcome Deputy Chief Constable Jason Harwin, who is attending our meeting today on behalf of the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum to present this report. Jason, over to you.
Sorry, Councillor Parker, it's Andy Gutherson. I was going to give the overview, and then Jason's available to also provide responses to questions and such like, if that's okay with yourself.
That's fine, Andy. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's fine. So, as the committee are aware, when we last reported through Dan Quinn was present at the meeting, we were in a situation where we were in the response. We'd gone into recovery stage in respect of the situation regarding COVID. At that stage, the responsibility and leadership had then fallen to Lincolnshire County Council to actually direct that on behalf of the LRF. I'd been appointed to represent the county as the chair of the Recovery Coordination Group, and the report you received from Dan was sort of reflecting our current position at that stage. Since that report, as you're all aware, in the context of the national position and the local position, levels of infections have risen, and as a result, a decision was made by the Local Resilience Forum to actually go back into a response stage. Just to put into context, that now means that the ownership and responsibility goes back into the hands of Jason as the chair of the SCG. And again, the approach and attitude of our activities has flipped slightly in terms of dealing with the day-to-day issues coming from the infection levels and all of the implications that follow on from that. Just to sort of put into context as well, on page 14, the report refers to the number of cases that were being reported on the 19th of October. As of yesterday, those total case numbers have now risen to 6,513, sort of a significant rise of over 1,500 from the 19th of October. And the death levels have again risen further to now being at 167 as per the recorded test results of COVID within 28 days of that first positive test. So again, even since the report was finalised, you can see and appreciate that the direction of travel continues to be one of an increased level of infections in and around Lincolnshire. We are still at a lower level than the majority of the parts of the country, but it reflects an upward trend across the piece. That validates the decision that was made by the LRF to move back into a response phase and a change of sort of emphasis in terms of the issues that were being prioritised and looked at in the context of the partnerships approach and attitude. The recovery work, therefore, has taken a bit of a backward step. That work is still proceeding. It's still been sort of like, I suppose, effectively ticking over to make sure that we don't lose sight of the long-term position that we want to get to. But in the short term, the governance structure, which is attached to your report, identifies the cell structure that is now in place to actually manage the day-to-day implications of the infection rates rising and the implications that brings for all partner organisations. In terms of that governance structure, one thing I would just flag to you, in the context of the cell structure that existed previously, a significant addition on this version is the Vaccination Cell. And again, you'll be aware of the reports, various reports in the press in the context of work proceeding to actually bring a vaccination forward. And again, through the leadership of the NHS, that work is progressing to make sure that Lincolnshire is in a position to receive and roll out the vaccination if and when that is released into the community. So that's a significant change in terms of the position. In terms of the underlying messages, it's still based on the hands, face, space criteria in respect of actually understanding the sort of risks and the measures and approaches we all need to take as individuals and within organisations to actually address and try and mitigate the spread of infections. Communications continues to run on that basis to try and make sure that our community is aware of the risks and the implications. But with infection rates rising, you can make your own conclusions about the sort of levels of success that are currently occurring in terms of how that's actually feeding through. I think the only other thing I would just sort of flag at the moment, and it's set out in your report, the LRF does work to a set of agreed objectives, and those objectives continue to get reviewed and will form the basis of the risks that are reviewed by the partnership to make sure that the mitigation measures and the activities that are taking place actually address those matters effectively. Those risks are continually reviewed at the weekly strategic group meeting and form the basis of future work programmes that are being developed. So, for example, one particular risk was recognising in the context of the capacity across the partnership, if we end up with a concurrent emergency, and as we enter the winter season, we know there are high risks of either flooding activity, adverse weather events. The capacity of all partners to address that was recognised as a risk. A tabletop exercise was carried out last week to ensure that we're in a position to actually respond effectively to that. That has identified there will be some issues around capacity, business continuity, and that will form the basis of further work to make sure that if those sort of concurrent emergencies arise, we are in a good position to actually address that and deal with that accordingly. I was going to leave it there. Both myself and Jason are on the call to be able to answer any questions if members want further detail.
Sure. Jason, is there anything you want to say?
No, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. I think it's a very good summary of where we are at the moment. I do remind people that we are responding to a national emergency, and I recognise at the moment we're truly trying to get back to a new business as usual. And that's, I think, every organisation, every part of our communities wants to do that as well. But the reality is the risk is still alive. And the reality is, as Andy's touched on there, is increasing. So we've got to do everything we can to, again, not just to prevent, but protect our communities from the consequences of the COVID-19. Particularly bear in mind our profile in our community with an older population, and obviously increases that group of people as well.
Thank you for that. You did make the point that you talked about our communities just then, and so did Andy. We, as OSNB members here, represent communities up and down Lincolnshire. So I'd be interested, starting off, who wants to make the first point or question from the report that we've got in front of us?
Yes, Chairman. Chairman, the Leader of the Council, Councillor Martin Hill.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought I'd, if you're happy, I'll just update the committee on the local outbreak engagement board meeting yesterday. Obviously, there's been a lot of speculation in the press. So we received advice from Derek Ward, Director of Public Health, and the unanimous view was that at this time there was no requirement to go up to the next tier, which would be the high tier. So although overall rates in Lincolnshire remain lower than the national average, the increases are probably in line with that. The one area where there is a bit more concern, of course, is Lincoln itself, which the rate of infection, that they are at the national level now in terms of that area. But I think the clear advice was that at this time, there is no need to go up a tier, but obviously it's very much a watching brief. And if things do change, we will look at it. I think it was also made clear that it's no good just looking at, it would be a mistake to just isolate one day's performance or data. And these things are normally looked on and over a 7-day period. In Lincoln itself, the rate of increase was beginning to decline over the weekend, but then has increased again. But I suppose, I mean, if there is, and I think there is an effect from the university, it does see the evidence from other university areas is that those that had the students back earlier are beginning to show declines now. But very much a watching brief, but at the moment, no further action. But we obviously wait and see the results as they come in on a daily basis. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Wotton, who's down to speak first?
I've got two more speakers, but I'd like to ask a question first, Chairman.
Of course.
In the south of the county, we're only 2 miles from the Nottinghamshire border. and also we've got Newark-on-Trent nearby. What sort of message would you send to our residents? Should they be cautious or wary of the risk of catching this virus being so near to the border?
Right.
So, if you'd like me to answer that first, Chair. Firstly, because Nottinghamshire will go into a Tier 3 this week, it'll be from tomorrow, the advice has been, as you know, not to go into Tier 3s unless you really need to travel into those areas. Now, I accept that's easier said than done, and this is the real challenge when we're having regional approaches in line with the threat that those communities face. So my advice would certainly be, in terms of the advice, unless it's really essential, people should not be going into those areas. But I do recognise people may have to go in for work, and certainly in terms of there may be some criticality to support individuals as well. We are importantly working with those counties to make sure that, again, in terms of what they are doing around compliance and enforcement, we are obviously supporting them, but at the same time making sure that we're not increasing the risk of people coming from them communities into our communities as well, again, unless there's an essential need either through work or other means at the same time. So the advice would be, look, if people don't need to go into those areas, unless it's essential, they shouldn't be going into those areas. But importantly, we recognise, again, that if they keep following the basic advice, which Andy touched on earlier around the hands, face and space, that in itself is preventive measures to reduce the risk to those individuals as well.
Okay, is that okay, Ray?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The next speaker I've got is Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Rob Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to raise a point in regards to clarity in the data. In the report, obviously it's a little out of date now, as been noted. It says 159 COVID-19 deaths. But as we know, that's if somebody has a positive test and then sadly dies within 28 days, that's registered as a COVID-19 death. But that would include people who sadly are terminally ill. So I'm not sure how clear this data is. I know perhaps it's probably a question more for Derek Ward than for this meeting, but it does strike me as a bit odd that we're not really 100% clear how sadly many people have died purely due to having COVID and are in ICU units, for example, and those people who have it recorded as part of the death. I do find this very confusing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if I try to answer that, Councillor Parker, yes, I think we all recognise that there are sort of issues in the context of how that approach has been taken. What it does provide is a consistency across the country and a consistency in the context of how that position changes on a day-to-day basis in Lincolnshire. So whatever the inadequacies of the approach are, it gives us a database which actually provides us a level of consistency in terms of understanding the sort of like implications. I presume in the context of the options that have been considered, as you say, through public health sort of colleagues, this is the best available approach in the context of actually pursuing this. And if you recall, earlier in the pandemic, there was a change to how deaths were recorded because of a refinement of actually how the data was being actually assessed. I don't know if Jason wanted to add.
No, I think the point, Andy, is, like I say, it's consistency, so you can actually compare the areas properly, which we weren't able to at the initial start. And again, the reality is there's no perfect data around it. I think the message I'd certainly send today is, and again, I think touch on it, Councillor, is in terms of people are ill with other things at the moment. We are really keen to keep pushing the message. If you are poorly, you need to go to hospital. We did see from the initial stages nationally, and again, I haven't got any local data to confirm that, but clearly where people were not attending those locations because obviously they felt that the hospital or the GPs were busy with other things. The reality is, if people are ill, then it's important they do consult and get that relevant support and advice, and if necessary, medical care as well. Don't be put off because of COVID-19.
It will come out, Chairman, when they have a subsequent inquiry into this pandemic. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ray.
Yes, Chairman, I've got two more speakers, Councillor Nigel Pepper and Councillor Carl Macy.
Okay, Nigel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just interested, living close to the county border. In fact, I'm speaking today from a property over in Cambridgeshire. Lincolnshire residents living at the south of the county are tested at Peterborough. If they receive a positive test, does that then go on to Lincolnshire statistics, or does that go on to Cambridgeshire statistics? And I do have another question.
Andy.
My understanding is that onto ours, it's the postcode where they're from. So that'll hopefully council confirms it. It's not where they're getting tested; it's the location of where they live is where it's recorded against.
Okay, yeah, Chairman, if I could just add to that, please. Jason's absolutely right. It is the postcode in which they live or which they have their permanent general practitioner. There has been a particular national issue that freshers, so particularly the first year of students who've still got their home general practitioner address, that obviously those positives that are in Lincoln are being coded to their home GP address, which is skewing the numbers slightly. Now, we have got a workaround in Lincolnshire because Lincoln University are doing their own test and trace, and so they're notifying us of their numbers. So I'm confident that from a Lincolnshire perspective, we are getting the data and understand our numbers, but there is a particular issue in relation to freshers nationally.
Thank you.
Fine. Your second question, Nigel.
If I could just come back on that then. So, yes, so if that goes on the Lincolnshire statistics with the Lincolnshire postcode. But added to that, if those who was tested positive then go to hospital, they'll attend Peterborough City Hospital and subsequently die in that hospital. The death is then registered in Peterborough. Does that then go on to Peterborough or Cambridgeshire statistics, or does it go on to Lincolnshire?
I'm not certain, Councillor, on that. I will check and come back to you on that, if that's okay. Because I know it as a question that's been raised before and I never got the answer, so I will come back to you, unless somebody else knows on the call now. I'm not certain on that.
Okay,
you got a job there.
Yeah, I'll wait to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was a question in terms of I represent a coastal ward, and at the moment in time, of course, we've just seen that East Lindsey has extended the holiday season. And clearly we're having people that live in tier 3s that are coming down to the caravans. And in fact, we've seen ourselves where someone said, oh, we're coming down tomorrow to make sure that we can get to the caravan prior to being locked down. How are we trying to deter these people from coming to Skegness or anywhere along the coast, and of course bringing with them the possibility of being infected and spreading that in those coastal areas? And secondly, with the coastal area already under pressure and having had a very hard summer season where they've struggled business-wise, what extra level of support can be put in place and is available for those in business?
Okay, if I start with the piece round people travelling in from tier 3 areas, and then obviously I don't know if Andy wants to come in around some of the recovery bit that's been done around the businesses. Firstly, and again, this has been an issue all the way through from our initial response, going into recovery, into response now, where we've clearly seen people coming into the areas that against the regulations, it's not against the law, and this is important, it's not against the law at the moment in terms of people travelling in, because again, it's advice. But what we have done is clearly look at the engage piece, where ultimately we recognise the risk that they could present, not just to themselves and their families, but to the wider communities as well. So there has been work done. We've got lots of examples over this last 6 months where ultimately we've all turned people around and they've gone back home. Because generally, majority are very sensible, recognising that they've obviously done it thinking they may not get caught out, but they've got caught out. They follow the advice from the engagement that we do and go and turn back round. The reality that we do know is from the work we're doing with East Lindsey at the minute from the Local Resilience Forum is clearly because of the economic challenges from that for the coastal area, particularly over the last few months, that obviously the season is looking to be extended out. And again, I know it's been well reported in terms of views from both council, communities and how that works. And we are doing from the Local Resilience Forum, obviously working with East Lindsey and the wider communities there, because it does create an increased risk around flooding, as we know. And then the risk is around evacuation if we need to come in to deal with that issue. So one of the things that we have been doing, is, and which Andy touched on at the start, is that we have done some planning and continue to work with East Lindsey in the sense of if the caravans, by way of example, remain open longer than normal, what would be our plans, or what are the plans of the council and those businesses to evacuate if we need to evacuate, recognising that time of the year the flooding is an increased risk on that coastal line as well. But back to your point, in terms of people coming into the area, again, we have done and will continue to engage with those individuals that really shouldn't be coming into the area. And let's remember, majority are very sensible and are not. Again, we are seeing that in other parts of the country where lots of businesses, particularly those that's in the hospitality business, are having lots of cancellations at last minute because people are realising, look, it's not in the interest for them, their family, and certainly for where they're going to go to attend. And we've also seen from businesses themselves being proactive in looking at where people are coming from and cancelling appointments, which again is very difficult because obviously it means they're losing money. Andy, I don't know if you want to come in terms of recovery, in terms of support business-wise.
Yeah, so in the short and immediate term, there obviously have been a range of government grant schemes which have been available and accessible to local businesses. And in the context of they've been provided through a combination of the district councils and also the county-wide business growth hub. As we found, every time when those grants have been available, there's been a level of oversubscription, which has caused issues and difficulties. But again, that's reflective of a national picture, not just a local picture. In the context of the recovery agenda, the work continues to pull together to actually understand the high risk areas of our economy, not just related to the coast, but I understand, Councillor Macy, why that's a particular concern to yourself, and identifying where and how further support can be provided. The leadership on some of that work has been picked up by the local enterprise partnership, and the intention is to bring back into the strategic coordination group next week further information to give the partnership confidence and clarity about how that is being rolled forward, to look at those sectors of the economy that might need further help as we progress. That work isn't being done in isolation, it's been done in partnership again with the relevant districts. So there's a joined up approach that ultimately becomes a point at which the level of support will not necessarily address all of the concerns, but we're trying to make sure it addresses the particular priorities. Across Lincolnshire, we have a high level of small and medium-sized enterprises. So again, it comes down to, in the context of the community impact, that's a lot of individuals operating at a relatively small scale that are then impacted in this, rather than perhaps bigger organisations, international organisations who have a bit more capacity to perhaps sort of like ride the storm a little bit. So again, that's something which has been a targeted area of activity, and that obviously has a bearing in the context perhaps down on the coast in terms of the hospitality sector in particular.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, any more questions, Ray?
Yes, Chairman, I've got Councillor Ron Oxby wishes to make a comment.
Fine, Ron, comment, question?
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a bit of information that it's a question I asked at the LPFT, which, as we probably know, Lincolnshire is a stakeholder governor. And I asked the fact that we are sanitising our hands and wearing face masks, would this likely to result in the incidence of colds and flu being diminished over our winter period? And the answer I got was the fact that the health authority look at Australia to see what is happening there. As you know, their season is now coming into spring, got over the winter period and now approaching spring. And apparently colds and flu, with the fact that they're wearing face masks, etc., has diminished. So hopefully, I won't say it's a good thing that COVID's happened, but there is a byproduct that colds and flu may reduce the incidence of overloading the health authority a bit. I thought I'd just share that piece of information with you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Ray.
Chairman, that is all the speakers I have. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I've got two questions that I want to pose. The first one is, I'm interested in knowing, as far as Lincolnshire is concerned, testing times and reporting back times. Can we say anything about the speed of response to be able to get a test, and once we've had a test, how long it takes to get a feedback?
So, Councillor Chair, certainly from my side, it's not an issue. So there has been issues over the last few months, as you know very well, which have been reported nationally, and not just relevant to Lincolnshire, but nationally as well. Certainly in terms of the stuff coming back now, and I can talk from my own experience with my officers as well, we are not seeing any significant delays, but in sense of normally long delays. There is exceptions to it, so I'm not saying there's not occurrences where there has been some delays, But overall, in terms of it getting back, it is between the 24 to 48 hours. Again, we've got our SCG today, so we do get an update, and by exception, we will get any reports in terms of if we've seen any significant delays, but we've not seen that in the county compared to some other parts of the country as well. I'm not saying there's not been exceptions, because there has. I could give you examples where there's been 72, 96 hours, some of them, but that's been the rarity, it's not been the norm.
Okay.
And if I could just add to that, Councillor Parker, a specific question that was raised this morning with Derek Ward was in the context of the issues around the student population in Lincoln. He was able to confirm that there is sufficient capacity to deal with the sort of concerns that have occurred in Lincoln. So again, in terms of that particular demographic and the particular risks associated with Lincoln at the moment, there are no concerns from a public health point of view in terms of that capacity.
Fine. And my second question is rather like Carl Macy about the economy, because I note that the second of our objectives is to try to minimise the impact on the economic well-being of Lincolnshire, which we all want to see. I just wonder whether we know, and we've got any method of calculating the impact. In other words, what do we know that we can talk about in number terms that tells us, and I appreciate the point was made by Jason, and Andy, we've got many small businesses, okay, but is it possible in any way that's acceptable and understandable to be able to say that as a result of the problems that we're facing through coronavirus, this has been the impact on Lincolnshire that's measurable and discussable at least?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, in the context of the work that's been done through the LEP and through my economic development team, that is about trying to understand and appreciate the measurements and the metrics that we normally use to actually paint the positive picture of the economic impact. The analysis of that is starting to sort of feed through. So in the context of people that are coming off furlough and redundancies, we can start to put figures and numbers to that, and then you can start to extrapolate what the potential implications of an increased level of unemployment might be, and what that might mean in the context of demands on other services as a consequence. So that data is forming the basis of the analysis that enables us to then identify what our recovery activities will focus in on. I think that work is at a point where possibly at your next meeting, Councillor Parker, we could bring back a specific item to give you the confidence about how that strand of recovery work is still taking place in the background, because it's a significant, important long-term objective to make sure that our economic recovery is managed as effectively as possible. So that is something which I think we're in a point where you get to your next meeting, we'll be in a place to bring some more detailed information to you and give you the confidence of our handle on the issues, if not our absolute confidence on actually the implications of where that's going to leave us. Because again, as Jason stressed, we're still in a situation where it's a moving situation day by day, and obviously the implications of that, some of that will fall out from the national agenda, as well as some of the bottom-up issues that will occur on a local basis. But I would think by the next meeting, Councillor Parker, we could bring that back to you as a substantive issue for debate and discussion.
I think that's really important, and I think that it's right that we have some of those figures, because, for example, unemployment figures are readily available for Lincolnshire over a period from March through till September, October, which is one, albeit crude, indicator. Furlough is going to end by the time of our next meeting. So it would be good to know, in a sense, it's not just about recovery, although we want to see that, but we can only recover when we're at the bottom of the trough, as it were, and are moving back upwards. So I wonder what position, I wonder, that's not asking you the question, I wonder what the situation will be like if we could track it over a period of time. Now, I know that you talked about getting stuff together, but it'd be good if we could have recent history to tell us in what direction it's going and to what extent. So anything you can do for the next meeting would be a positive on what we've got at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Councillor Parker. And again, I think the reason why the recovery activities are still taking place is that we don't switch off the understanding of what the recovery agenda needs to be and wait till we hit the bottom of the barrel. We want to be as far as possible on the front foot to actually start addressing those issues concurrently with whilst we're still addressing the sort of second phase in terms of response.
That's good. Yeah, thank you. Finally, anybody else wants to say anything? Okay. Well, we've been two actions. We've considered the report. That's fine.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt. Chief Executive would like to speak.
Fine. Okay.
Hello, good morning. Hi, thank you. I thought it might just be helpful because most of the discussion has focused on the LRF and its function in response. And obviously, Councillor Martin Hill, the leader of the council, referenced the local outbreak and engagement board. So I thought it just might be helpful to just spend a couple of minutes just to update the committee in terms of the remit of both the LRF and the local outbreak engagement board. So the local outbreak engagement board is chaired by the leader of the council. It's attended by the district council leaders and chief execs, the police crime commissioner, and also the local enterprise partnership. And its role is very much to engage the public with regard to prevention and the current requirements and restrictions that are in place. Their role is to endorse the local outbreak plan, but it's also to engage with other stakeholders about any decisions around any additional requirements that would be required. So some of that might be at a business level, for example. It might be looking at directions that need to go onto a business or closure that need to go, or because of non-compliance that we would be requesting closure of that particular business. Or it may be about engaging with MPs and the Department for Health and Social Care about moving from one tier to another tier or indeed down a tier. So it was really just to make the distinction that whilst the LRF is clearly very much focusing on coordinating the partnership to have a response activity, the recommendations about engaging with the public and proactively leading the comms, the communications and the engagement with the community about restrictions. It is also a decision maker, well, the leader of the council is the decision maker with regard to any decision to close any businesses or to make any recommendations and engage with stakeholders about the changing of the area into a different tier, although ultimately that decision would rest with national government.
Thank you for that, Debbie. That's helpful, really. Okay, so is there anybody else who wants to speak? No. Okay, so as I was saying, action required. We've considered the report. We've reviewed and agreed future reporting requirements, which, as Andy said, a paper back to the next meeting, and so that we can monitor progress, particularly in relation to economic measures that we can, economic measurements that we can be given. Okay, so that's where we're at. Does that sound like the way forward? Can we have agreement on that? Those in favour, please indicate.
Chairman, people will have to make their switch their cameras on.
So, cameras on, as Nigel said.
That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Andy and Debbie. Okay, if we move to item 8, which is the transformation programme overview. Here we're going to consider a report, whether the board supports the report, and we're going to agree any additional comments. Okay. Claire Rowley, Head of Transformation, is going to present the report on behalf of Andrew McLean. Claire.
Chair, do you mind if I just start with a brief introduction? Yeah. Would that be okay?
Okay. James.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. So for me, this is a really important piece of corporate activity, really. And in the past, we've delivered our projects and programmes through our services and through our departments. What we'll be doing with the corporate transformation programme is achieving the best of both worlds. So we want to retain that service expertise, that professionalism, but we also want to increase corporate visibility of the key projects and the most important projects and programmes across the council. We need to help to understand how they link together and how they meet our corporate priorities from our corporate plan and how they're delivering those. And we need to do those in an innovative way as we move forward. So I think for me, it's about how we ensure we continue to deliver quality services, but in a way that's really sustainable. And the corporate transformation program is a way of grouping those together, understanding those dependencies, helping us manage our limited capacity and resource across those and prioritising the right things, but also ensuring that there's good visibility for both members through scrutiny, exec and CLT. And with that, I'll hand over to Claire to talk through the report. And Claire's newly appointed as head of the transformation through the extensive recruitment process, and delighted that she was successful through that, Chair. So thank you.
Okay. That's a good introduction, Claire, from James. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So our corporate plan, which sets out the goals and ambitions the council wishes to achieve for its residents over the coming years, has now been set, as already referenced, and recognises that there is a need to focus and resource activity to deliver the plan, driving innovation and efficiency that is best delivered through a corporate transformation programme. This is all supported by change management and also recognisable benefits realisation. The transformation programme as a whole encompasses a number of wide-ranging projects that will positively impact upon all of those that engage with our council. So our residents, our communities, members, staff, businesses, visitors, and more. The programme is organised into 3 overarching work streams: our people, our communities, and our processes, each of which have a number of projects to be delivered within them, with enabling technology acting as a key driver throughout. Dedicated funds have been identified to support the delivery of the programme, and comprehensive governance arrangements are in place to oversee its delivery, and these are referenced on page 26 and also within Appendix 2 of the paper circulated. The overall aims of the programme are to develop a strong vision, direction and identity, put our customers at the heart of everything we do, become an employer of choice, be more flexible and agile in how we operate, have leadership that is collaborative and empowering through a distributed leadership approach, and also develop a culture that promotes ownership and accountability. We're asking for the board to support the recommendations to the executive as set out in the report shared, and also share any additional comments for agreement to be passed on to the executive. The alternative for individual projects to be managed in isolation within individual directorates is not recommended. As already highlighted, it will provide no corporate oversight and assurance that relevant governance is in place, and that intended outcomes were consistently aligned to corporate priorities and were tracked to ensure they are realised. So the reason for our recommendation is that a corporate transformation programme with allocated resources, dedicated capacity and robust governance will help ensure the council is able to fulfil its vision and priorities as set out in the corporate plan, whilst also bringing to life and driving our ambition for a one council approach. A corporate programme will also ensure that key stakeholders, all those we've already mentioned and listed, so our staff, our residents, our councillors and communities, are engaged in the development of all our projects, and there will be appropriate governance arrangements in place to provide assurance that intended benefits have been realised. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Claire. Ray.
Yes, just one speaker at the moment, Chairman, and that's Councillor Jackie Brockway.
Thank you. The bit I wanted to raise is in Appendix 1 on page 32. Is now a good time, or would you want me to wait?
No.
Now?
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. This is very good and it's very interesting. It's really good to see such positive things. But I'm going to be a bit of a so-and-so here and challenge one or two of the things you're saying. If I could ask you to look on page 32, please, if you would. Now, there are things in here that always worry me when we put this kind of paper forward. And it isn't just this one, it's just the principle of what's being done. If you look at the top of the page, strategy, governance, programme delivery, etc., and the first bullet point says, that, talks about the objectives and that we are going to define and deliver the programme. Okay, my question would be, why do we need to say that? Surely we're doing that already, and if not, why not? when we actually have this type of paper coming forward, we do get all these bullet points and saying we're going to do this and we're going to do it better. But in my little mind, I'm sitting there thinking, well, are you actually telling me that we're not doing this already? And if not, why not? So if you go into the next batch of bullet points as well, the top one says, provide successful management and delivery of work streams. That should be there. So do you see what I'm saying? The wording of something like this, while it can look positive and it enthuses people and already, all that sort of thing, it also raises questions about why we're still having to say this sort of thing. So, you know, just throwing that thought in there, see what you think. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but thank you.
Claire, over to you then.
Thank you. So this section was particularly in relation to the strategy, governance and programme delivery and resourcing. So by inclusion of define and deliver the programme, it's partly the need to reference that is to make sure we've got that scope for the programme as a whole. And so that we do have that clarity and we do have that definition in what we're trying to actually achieve as a programme and everything that sits beneath that. So that's why we always feel the need to kind of include that when we're talking about that strategy and governance section. I accept your point, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are you okay with that, Jackie?
Chairman, yes, thank you. I'm okay with it. I do feel, though, sometimes that we need to be careful in our languaging, because sometimes a simple sentence can have other implications. And do we need to make clear that it applies just to this section? Because that's not what it says. And this is a public-facing document. And I raise this all the time when we talk about our targets. It's just that sometimes the languaging needs to be the one that people are going to receive correctly, rather than just in relation to a tiny section. The languaging carries implications. So I just put that there as a caution, if I may. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, Chairman, I've got Councillor Angela Newton wishes to speak.
Thank you. Angela.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you. On page 26, the programme funding, it includes an underspend carried forward of 7.33 million from 2019-20. It's quite a big sum when the other part added to it is 3 and a bit million to make up the total cost of 10 and a bit to carry out the work. I'm just wondering why we've got such a big carry forward for that year, because that was prior pandemic. So I wondered if I could have an answer to that. And then on Appendix 2, on page 52 it was, I think, I couldn't really understand the page 52, Appendix 3, anticipated costs and benefits. The fourth bullet point down didn't sort of make too much sense to me, where it says costs are expected, additional costs, and do not include. I'm just wondering if there's a typo there that probably makes it more readable. Thank you.
Would it help if I might be able to come in to help to answer those 2 points, if that's okay? So the underspend was based on the carry forward of the figure of the 7 million figure was based on the underspend from last year, an agreement to look to reinvest that into this transformation programme. So there was an agreement around that one council approach, bringing together where those underspends had occurred in the previous financial year and focusing them on the programme to help achieve some of those priorities set out within the corporate plan. So starting that one council approach in terms of our bringing funding together to deliver that. The other figure really is in relation to funds that were earmarked previously to support some of the initiatives that have come into the transformation programme for management, such as the redesign of the business world system, some of the review of our corporate support services contract. The fourth bullet point on the note under Appendix 3. So what that's saying is at this moment in time, the first part is around they are expected additional costs. So we're still early on in a lot of the programme, so they are forecasts based on lead officers' previous knowledge of some of these projects. The fact that it doesn't include existing resource capacity is whereby some of my time, Claire's time, some of our internal project team's time that is being directed and focused on this. That might be HR, our communications team, finance. We're not including those existing costs, so they are around new costs to the authority that would be incurred as part of that programme. And we've tried to forecast them over the next 5 years. So some of those costs that are within there might only last the next 6 to 8 months because of the nature of the project, whereas others, such as smarter working, could run for some time. So in coming up with the cost overall, we've tried to forecast that over the lifetime of the project, and acknowledging that they would be new costs to be funded from the transformation programme, and not showing cost of existing resource where there is already an existing budget. Does that help clarify that bullet point?
Yeah, it does, but it grammatically it just didn't read correct to me. It's as though there was a word missing, and I was trying to work out what it was or where it was. But
okay,
you know,
take that on board to make sure that it's clear for any future reports. So thank you.
Right.
No more speakers, Chairman.
Okay, I'll step into the gap while people have a think. Looking at Appendix 1 with a lot of bullet points. Okay, I wonder where we fit in as councillors, because we're doing quite a lot with virtually everybody, staff, partners, the people that we want to engage with, and I don't see in the 4 or 5, 6 pages in relation to our communities, and we are the representatives of communities. I don't see much mention of the active role of councillors in either providing information or being sounded out or being part of the process. I wondered if you could help in that.
Yeah, certainly. We would very much want you to be part of that, and we can either, if anyone's got any ideas today, or if we could perhaps have a separate meeting with yourself, Chair, and your Vice Chair after this meeting, so that we can understand how we might best do that engagement with yourselves. That would be appreciated.
Because there's 70 eyes and ears out there engaging with communities, being told about the outcome of services. In one sense, letters of complaint are one form, but you get plenty of councillors who get their ears bent about A, B, C, D and E. So I can't help but feel there's a role for councillors. The point that Angela raised, and I wasn't sure about the expenditure of that 7.2 million that was underspent. What's the driver? Okay, when we do a reorganisation, there's bound to be a cost. I accept that, but I just wondered about that 7.2 million in terms of what we're going to see for our books, as it were.
Do you mean in terms of a benefits as an outcome of that?
Well,
yeah.
First of all, inputs. What's it going on? And secondly, outputs. What do we expect to see for it? Because 7.2 million, if somebody was arguing, could say that's a hell of a lot of potholes that could be fixed, or whatever we want to say in relation to any part of the council's service areas. So yes.
Yeah, and I suppose the spend of that will range massively, given the wide variety of projects that are included within the programme. So there's near on 20 different projects. So what it will actually be spent on will vary, pending whether that's something in relation to our review of our future corporate support services, right through to our Business World programme, where we're spending some of that funding working with Hoople. That changes on each and every project is quite unique to that. Within each project, though, is a requirement to develop clear benefits realisation plan for what we're going to get out of the investment, to make sure we do get the benefits on that return on investment, whether that be cashable savings, whether that be greater efficiencies within the council, better services for our staff or for our communities, our visitors, businesses, and such. So one of the key things, and picks up on, I think, the comment made earlier on, and why in that very first early bullet point around where we speak around managing these projects, is to make sure that we do go back and test that those benefits have been realised. and understand, if not, why not, or what we can do to ensure that they are, so that before any project comes to a closure, we actually do that test to say, well, what's been the investment? What did we intend to get out of that from the very start, whether that be cashable or non-cashable or society benefits, and then make sure we test that, ensure we've actually got something out of that and can evidence that as part of any project closure. And that should be done throughout the lifetime of the project as we expect to realise those. So it's ensuring that we do that and then can come back and report that through the governance arrangements set out within the programme.
Yeah, and can't help but feel that the executive through OSMB would seriously welcome periodic reports, you know, to say, okay, we put this slug of money in, and these X number of projects, how are things going? And I think that's an important part of the scrutiny role that we have here. So I'd look forward to some sort of paper, not necessarily to a committee, but some sort of paper being circulated as to how this this is going to be captured to measure success and failure.
Yeah, certainly we can do that and can programme in working with executive and scrutiny committee around the what that might look like, and factor that in, and in terms of when projects are coming through to completion as well, so that we can see what's planned to be completed by when, what those benefits are, and showing that test of how they've been realised.
And that leads me on to another point, which is OSMB is one scrutiny committee. A lot of these projects will be what I'm going to call specialist, in the sense that they are particularly about adult social care or highways or whatever. Not all of them, but some of them are going to be what you might call service delivery specific. So it's also appropriate, I can't help but feel, for the individual scrutiny committees to be appraised of how money is being spent in their area and how well it's being spent in terms of outputs, because it's the outputs that flow to direct benefits for the individual person, community, that we're interested in, as much as knowing how it's been spent and what benefits we've got. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, does anybody else want to add any additional comments to pass on to the executive?
No more speakers, Chairman.
Okay, so we've got, as we can see on page 55, sorry, I should have said, thank you, Claire. So we've considered the report. Do we support the recommendation is one thing, and secondly, agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive, which I'll do next week. So we've captured second. So are we supporting the recommendation? Can we please indicate?
Happy to propose, Chairman.
Sorry, oh yes, proposer and seconder. You're proposing, Ray, and is there a seconder?
Happy to second that, Chairman.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you. I'm not sure who that was, actually.
That was Councillor Macy and Councillor Newton.
Fine, thank you. Lovely. Okay, so those in favour? Those against? We've done it. Fine,
that's carried,
that's carried. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, lovely. Move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 9, Smarter Working Programme update. We've got two people, Karen Kassar and Kevin Kendall, to report. Who's going first?
That's myself, Councillor.
Well
Karen Kassar. Hi. I've just got a presentation I'm going to share with you. I'll just share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that by now. So good morning, everybody. Bringing here today a paper, an update on the Smarter Working Programme. Summary and purpose of the report today is to share the corporate leadership team's agreed vision, goals and objectives for Smarter Working, to provide the committee, the Scrutiny Board, with a summary of the data and analysis that has been undertaken on the Smarter Working survey, which was available for all employees to complete between Monday the 21st of July and Sunday the 9th of August, and to provide you with an update on our emerging office accommodation and workspace strategy, which will deliver the principles of smarter working. So smarter working, our vision, our goals and objectives, and supporting our staff to deliver their best. The COVID-19 pandemic, as we're all aware, has required the workforce to work in a very different way, with staff delivering services through innovative and creative approaches, and our IT department enabling staff to work virtually. This has opened up the opportunity for us to radically review how we work in the future. The Smarter Working programme has been established and seeks to explore and define how we can operate in a more flexible and blended way to the traditional approaches to work, building on the strengths of our current delivery model. The Smarter Working programme has worked with the corporate leadership team to develop the vision, goals and objectives, with the aim being to optimise performance and support employees to deliver their best for our councillors, yourselves and communities, and to deliver upon our ambition to become one council. So what I don't propose to do, because it's within the report, is to go through this verbatim, but what you can see there is our vision. It's through continued investment in technology, our ambition to become one council, to work with maximum flexibility with minimum constraints. And also, in the face of adversity, it has given us confidence to continue our journey to develop even smarter working. Our goals there, you will see the 6 bullet points. And as I say, it predominantly is around working upon what our lessons learned in COVID and also improving the way we work through technology. The analysis of the staff survey. So the current working relationships, arrangements, apologies, what we can see here that predominantly the majority of our staff are working from home, with only a small percentage based at working locations. So from that picture, we can see that we are helping to keep the levels very low, we're keeping our staff safe, and we're still maintaining a service. What we also asked our staff to do was about their future working preferences. And if you look here, 75% of our staff support our proposed smarter working, where that is a blended approach, on the example being 2 days in the office, 3 days working from home. And we asked our employees, do they consider they are working effectively from home? And again, what you can see here, 71% believe they are working effectively. 26% sometimes, and we have looked into the data which has told us that our journey to improve our IT has improved, therefore people being able to work effectively has improved. I'll hand over to Kevin now just to talk you through the office accommodation strategy.
Thank you for that, Karen.
The office accommodation strategy consists of 4 key components. So they're listed there. So there's to aim to reduce the amount of office estate the council has, and to then achieve an office estate the council can afford. To do that, to utilise what's called a managed workspace, and I'll come on to that in the next few slides. But also, it's important that we do develop an exit strategy for the buildings that we do come out of, to make sure they will benefit the local economy and environment. So if I just pick up now the reduction in office space. So we're doing some modelling at the moment, and we're using some criteria to do the modelling in terms of the amount of space we believe we need in the future. And that is to work upon the basis of staff typically spending 2 days per week in the office, the rest working from home. And we're also looking at how we distribute the remaining capacity across the county. We currently have 37 what we call pure office buildings. That is their principal use. But we are also using other buildings which have an office type facility within them, for example, depots, and we're using that as part of our calculation. Some headline figures at the moment at the bottom there. So we think we can reduce the floor space across the county by between 20 and 30%, and potentially reduce the number of office buildings by 50%. and headline saving for that will be around about £1 million. And there will be capital receipts and cost avoidance on things like maintenance. We haven't yet been able to come to an exact figure on those, but there will be certainly capital receipts and maintenance avoidance to be achieved. So next couple of slides, just looking at what a managed workspace is. This first slide recognises the fact that we will need dedicated space for some services, particularly, say, social workers that need to touch down unannounced without booking. But the rest of the managed workspace, the aim is to have a bookable workspace. And by phase one, post-COVID, and we'll be using mainly offices as they are, but what we will be doing is to declutter, depersonalise the space to enable desks to be used by anyone or meeting rooms to be used by anyone. So that's a key principle of the managed workspace. And to do that, we're looking to introduce a cloud-based booking system to allow staff and teams to book space online. Next slide, please, Karen. So the remainder of the office space will be a managed workspace, and we estimate that 70% of all space won't be allocated to directorates or services, and it will consist of multi-purpose bookable spaces. And there's a list there of the types of work and tasks that could be undertaken in a bookable space. So there could be formal meetings, what we're calling hybrid meetings, whereby there'll be people on Teams, but there will also be people in the office, and clearly that needs some technology in rooms to enable that to happen. The focus on the managed workspace will be around collaboration on the basis of teams coming together, whereas more task-based admin type functions could be done at home. So the office in the future will be around collaboration, we think, project-based innovation and creative activity. Thanks, Karen.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. So timeline for the Smarter Working programme. So the majority of our buildings are now open, all have been risk assessed and control measures put in place to minimise as far as reasonably possible the risk of COVID-19 transmission. The next phase will be to undertake a review to prioritise which services and staff need to be working in the offices, and this will require further risk assessments and control measures in line with national guidance. The current national guidance is that if staff can work from home, they should continue to, and this is our current advice to staff. Guidance is being developed for the safe return to offices for some staff to undertake specific face-to-face activities once the national guidance reflects that advice. The timeline for this guidance is December, but will be dependent upon national guidance once again. Longer term, the ambitions of Smarter Working will be implemented, and the next step is to develop the design principles and office accommodation strategy. And an operational delivery plan schedule is currently being developed, which will outline specific timeline and costs, including cost benefits for the programme. So our recommendations are there outlined on the presentation.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of proposals here. We're going to consider the report and to determine whether we support the recommendation set out by Karen and Kevin, and what comments we want to make. Ray, speakers.
Yeah, I've got myself, Chairman, and also Councillor Jackie Brockway.
Okay, over to you, Ray.
Yeah, if I could refer you to page 62, 1.3.6. It says here the data shows that almost 50% of those not working from home would have a preference to continue not working from home. And then we look at page 63, 1.3.9. I'm quite concerned that many of those surveyed felt very isolated and didn't really interact with their colleagues anymore, and also could have mental health concerns and perhaps not even feel part of a team. How do we make sure that they do feel part of a team? How do they feel that they are working together?
Okay, so what we have done, recognising the findings from this survey, working with our HR colleagues and managers across all the service areas, we've put together some wellbeing support facilities. We have pulled together best practice of how teams have been interacting. So some teams hold cake and coffee say for half an hour, where everyone comes together on Teams. And I think it's learning and listening to how others have got over these hurdles. We have across the service areas, we have a number of inquiries or requests coming in from directorate leadership teams for specific staff to access buildings, and those are considered. And if we can accommodate them safely and we don't have overcapacity in the buildings, which then we wouldn't be operating within the COVID guidelines, we do try to accommodate as best we can. But we do recognise that we have, the need to support our staff. And as I say, we've put quite a number of courses on to support staff, which have been very highly subscribed to. So there are a range of support methods there, but also recognising that as managers and leaders, we need to support our teams. We need to make sure, and that runs right the way from Debbie as the chief executive through the CLT to DLTs and right the way through to the bottom of the organisation, that there is that understanding we do have to support our staff and really encourage communication within teams and the expectations of our managers to support our officers.
Yeah, Chairman, if I could come back, please.
Yeah, sure.
As a councillor, I can see the benefits of working from home. Less travelling, less cost to the council, and also if I'm logging on, if I see somebody green I want to speak to, I know they will answer the phone or the video straight away and speak to them face to face. But I do feel it's that loss of interaction because we're not all together in meeting, because you might want to speak about another topic, and it's like being together.
Yes, and I think if I could just answer that, what we did at the start, there are two very distinct projects going. So there's the current working from home in response to the COVID-19, keeping our staff safe, identifying which services individuals need to come in the office, putting the measures in there and the support to staff for the here and now. The Smarter Working programme is post-COVID, when with no social distancing, the interactions there with staff, we no longer have to worry about being in the same room. So that's where this paper is about the long-term, the Smarter Working programme post-COVID. But the here and now, the COVID-19 workspace management is what we are currently looking at, and we keep re-evaluating as soon as we get new guidance from central government. We are very in touch with all the service areas. We have an engagement group with a member of each of the service areas attends. So it's a very two-way communications, very reactive at the moment to assist our officers. But there are two very distinct projects going on.
Right, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay.
Two speakers, Councillor Jackie Bockley and Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of things to pick up from there. I was going to ask about the isolation as well, but I have had conversations with some team leaders just in normal business working, and a lot of them are actually having greater contact with their people in their teams and are engaging in a new and different way, seeing each other dressed differently in each other's houses and things like that. So that's very good, but I am very conscious that the need to work from home, even if it's just part-time, could eventually alter the makeup of the officer cohort, because the people who are going to be taking the jobs then are those who are able to do that. Not everybody can do that if they've got little children running around, for instance. So it is an interesting problem. But the other thing I wanted to raise, please, was the concept of bookable spaces. I have got involvement with another council, and there they did an experiment where they called it agile working, and it had to be done very carefully. It did have quite a few negative repercussions, and one of the main ones was that people didn't feel that they had a space where they had ownership. And okay, they could say, they've got to come in and work wherever they need to work and things like that, but people do like to have some sort of base, where they can go and find their coffee cup in the same place and things like that. So just mention that as something to be aware of, that it can be very disruptive not knowing where you're going to come in and sit down, or even in this instance, possibly which room you're going to be working in. And the last thing is, as a result of my various conversations, purely talking about something else, somebody dropped into a conversation that because of the COVID working, we're talking about good practice and work-life balance, you mentioned, Karen, that some of our colleagues who are not particularly high up the employment scale yet are having to work considerably long hours, including into the early hours of the morning. And that's something that worried me. So maybe, Karen, you're the person I would just contact about that to give a bit more detail. It was just a throwaway comment, but once I've heard it, I can't unknow it, if you see what I mean. So would you be the person for me to pass that to?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes, I'll do that. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, if I take your first point, what the corporate leadership have been very clear when we set off on this programme was it is a not one size fits all, it's a blended approach. We have such varying different services across the council, and like I say, what would suit one service area would not necessarily match, say, highways or adults, children's and HR. So it really is a blended approach. And as I say, corporate leadership have been very clear in that direction. And what they're looking for is to, like I say, is to deliver the smarter working, but also to take account of individual service needs, which was where we refer to the blended approach, where, like I say, it might suit one team to work in one way, but not another. So we're very cognizant of that fact.
Thank you.
That's okay, Jackie.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Chairman.
Yep, you said Rob Kendrick, didn't you, Ray?
Yes, and I also got Councillor Bob Adams as well.
Okay, so Rob and then Bob.
Thanks, Chairman. I take it this is based on sort of good practice in similar organisations as a model. That's my first point. And the second point, picking up on what Councillor Wootton was saying about social isolation, I think this is particularly important from the point of view of people dealing with their peers. I think it's a different position where you've got management wishing to communicate with staff and liaising with staff. But being amongst peers, I think, is very important from time to time. I can recall from my own experience sharing offices with social workers and other frontline staff that they come back into the office, as I've done on occasion, and sort of say, oh, that's been a difficult visit or whatever. And you offload, to use the jargon, with your colleagues. And, and maybe it's, oh, have a cup of tea and have a chat and say, how did it go and all the rest of it. If we're going to be totally isolated, which I guess you're not going to be under this system, I know you've mentioned it's not one size fits all. I do think there's still very much a place for people to be able to interact with their peers, not necessarily with management, which can be very helpful to their mental health. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, could I just come back on that? Is that okay? So as part of the work, again, Debbie as our sponsor from CLT, we are looking at leading a smarter workforce, but also we're doing work now. And it's expectations of our managers as leaders and to lead the way with staff, to set out how we can have that peer engagement across. So instead of, you manage a team and you're normally there in an office and it's presenteeism and you get used to seeing people so they're okay. We're having to look at a very different quality and support our managers to get to that where we're leading a smarter workforce, where we do have that, we expect the peer contact across, and how we ensure that everybody who is part of that team feels part of that team. So we're currently looking at that for the qualities, the behaviours that we're looking for leaders to take us on this next journey.
Okay, is that okay, Rob?
Yeah, I think the point is not so much the sort of relationship between sort of frontline staff and management and vice versa. I think it's mutual support amongst frontline staff with each other, because they experience the day-to-day issues out in the field, as it were, as social workers or occupational therapists or whatever it may be, community nurses. And I think sometimes people need that opportunity to meet and share. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
And I would think it's fair to say that when I was talking about the presentation, we are recognising exactly what you say, Councillor Kendrick, in relation to that peer support. So we are looking at how we can support those specific areas of staff. So that is underway at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, while we're on that subject, could I just come in with it's not just support. It's about sharing birthdays, for example, all the things that go on that make an office, when it's captured on television, for example, that dynamic changing, sometimes arguing, but that sort of approach. And I wonder how that can be replicated, or whether or not we just have to live with a changing world.
I suppose when we were doing the corporate leadership staff briefings, we did workshops and we captured the feedback direct from all the staff, and we did a number, I think it was about 12. But what I have found, or feedback to me, you know, when you get in an organisation, you have hierarchies. It's like myself, assistant director, heads of service, and then you have like people that are lower grades in the organisation. They're actually seeing the human side from us. So I could have a conversation and they're seeing that I'm human. They're getting closer to us, they're listening to us. And we got that feedback from the CLT staff briefings, that they felt closer to, say, Debbie that was presenting in the corporate leadership team. It was a lot more positive, because we didn't know when we first started how that would be. And I know from my perspective, every morning at 9 o'clock, I have a meeting with my heads of service. And the dynamics and the team and the blending has really benefited from that. So it's, at first we saw it as a hurdle, but staff are really seeing, like I say, the human side to us as individuals.
That still doesn't help celebrate together birthdays, does it?
Unless we could do when it's somebody's birthday, when we say the coffee and cake moment, you know, when we still recognise people. Yes, we do the cards via the post, or, you know, the teams do it within there, still the same. I do take your point, it's not face to face.
Okay. Yeah, I accept that. Okay. Sorry, who's next? Thank you for that, Karen.
Chairman, I've got Councillor Bob Adams, but I've also got a request from Jackie Brockway to have copies of Kevin Kendall's slides. And then I've got a further request from Martin Hill to speak as well.
Okay, so
it's Councillor Bob Adams next.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. A lot of the points I was going to make have already been made. I think we've experienced this a little bit in SK, which is similar to Jackie. The big element, there's two main elements to me which have gone. That is seeing team working in the same environment where you've got work people working together as a team. They're sharing ideas as and when they happen in this sort of instance, and that has gone. Another thing that has gone, Chairman, is that from a member point of view, and I've heard a lot about staff situations here, not heard anything yet about the building up of relationships with staff, members of staff, and councillors. We get, as a councillor, we get to know our officers by that personal contact at meetings, by dialogue, etc. That has all gone, and somehow I think we need to bear in mind that councillors are working with the officers as well, and they need that team involvement, if that is the right expression. So that really does concern me. And the other thing that really concerns me, and I'm seeing this now quite frequently, is officers come and go and we don't really know about it, and then we're looking for some help or some guidance. And the officer that we've been dealing with, I'm not talking obviously at the senior management level, but at our sort of day-to-day working level, suddenly we're struggling to know who we're going to contact and who we're going to build a virtual relationship, and it is very, very difficult. I'm with Jackie here. I think we are going to have to go down this route at some level or another. But please, let's not make haste too quickly, and let's make sure that when we put something in place, it is sustainable and workable. Because I think it's a new dimension. We are social people, and we thrive on that social intercourse and that social contact. And take it away, that isolation, and somebody mentioned mental health, they will become major factors as we go forward. I really think we've got to be very cautious as how quickly we try and take this forward.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, Karen?
Yes. From my personal perspective, I don't think Councillor Davis is on this call. Every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, it's in the diary, and we have a briefing session, and we have action logs, decision logs that we take from that session. And I know from my personal perspective, I'm looking at that. I know he welcomes that. Now, it may be that we look as part of the Smarter Working programme, that we consider how we do those briefing sessions and replicate that across the piece. I do think it'll be a lot different when we go into Smarter Working, because officers will be coming back into the offices, for activity-specific items, and whether that's meeting councillors. It's just the here and now for staff, keeping staff safe and maintaining the social distancing, making sure that the buildings are COVID safe. So I think it's hard at the moment, but I think once post-COVID is out of the way, it will be a lot easier. But do take on board Councillor Adams' comments, and we'll take that away for how we work it through. And I know Debbie, as our CLT sponsor, has got a hand up. I'm not sure whether Debbie wanted to add to anything that I was saying there.
Debbie, do you want to come in?
Happy to come in at the
Debbie,
end.
do you want to come in at the end? Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Chairman, may I just come back on that, because we're talking about post-COVID. Post-COVID could be 3, 4, 5 years ahead of us. Post-COVID is not going to go away in the short term in terms of weeks or months. It's going to be years. And that is why I say we've got to make haste slowly in terms of what we're going to establish now has got to last. My view can be totally wrong, and other people's view can be right in terms of how long COVID is going to last. But I think we've got it for 3, 4, 5 years.
Okay. Right, Councillor Hill. Martin, you wanted to say something, yeah?
Yeah, it was just on the point you made, and I think Jackie and Bob Adams has made also. Just on the last point, I don't think there will be a post-COVID. I think it will be just like flu and other viruses. It will be, we'll just be with us forever. And I think hopefully we'll get to a stage where both with medical and we will just learn how to manage the situation. Coming back to the issue about working together, and as I think either Karen or Kevin Kendall said, the current thinking is, and obviously this is still developing, is that the Kpis staff will come into the office some days a week. So you get the benefit of saving money and staff having more time to just get on with the job. But at the same time, they still see each other. So I think the view is that maybe all staff will come in together. I think that's very important, because I think what's been said about team working, the actual morale boosting, and the sort of office culture, if you like, which is actually very important, and actually part of a lot of people's well-being as well, because not everybody has the benefit of a family life and all the stuff at home. So I do think if everybody came together, that would manage to do all those things on a regular basis, and I'm not sure what that regular basis is. And there's also about training as well, because informally, I think we all know in an office environment, you do tend to learn from other people who have gone through the learning curve earlier in their career, how they manage situations and how they, for example, deal with people who have issues. So I think that's the view why we're saying it's not going to be like this, not going to be everybody working from home all the time forevermore. That to me would seem to be, and I think to the executive would seem to be the right compromise. But clearly, if there's just a quick briefing or something, or a quick meeting to discuss one or two things, well, why would you all want to go and sit in a room somewhere and talk about it and waste time driving about the countryside? So I think that's very much what the strategy is all about.
Sure, thank you, Martin. That's good. Okay, any more questions?
No further questions, Chairman.
I've got one for Kevin. I think it's Kevin in relation to the workspaces, the physical, as opposed to the social interaction that you've dealt with, Karen, and that's to do with the question of shared spaces. And I'm just interested in how far up the hierarchy it'll be for individual offices and shared spaces, because that's a message that goes out very clearly. Because it's one thing to say that you can come into an office and you're just going to have a cupboard over there and the desk, we're going to hot desk. Okay, does that go up from social worker to senior social worker? And how far up the chain is it going? Because if we're all going to be working 2 days in and 3 days out, then I'm interested in the hierarchical approach and where the line's going to be cut off.
Shall I come in on that?
Okay. Diplomatically.
I might as well. Diplomatically, if this is the approach that the council and the executive support, I clearly support it. I want to move, and the vast majority of the workforce have fed back to us that they want to move to a hybrid approach. They think that they can be much more effective and productive. Of course, as the leader was saying and other people have said, of course we need to make sure that there's opportunities for staff to come together. That's where you get a bit of grit in the system, you get a bit of challenge and support and innovation and creativity. There's particular challenges, I think, about new staff and making them feel part of the team, and that's difficult to do virtually. We're looking at workarounds at the moment, but as we move forward into a hybrid world, we think that there is something very, very important about inducting new staff. So there are reasons why we need to come together. But I think what COVID has shown us is that we don't need to come together for the same level of activity and for the same activities as we used to before. So it's about learning, I think, about what's worked well and moving that in and embedding that as we move forward. I don't see it as a hierarchy issue. I see that I would be working in exactly the same way as every other member of the team, and that individuals wouldn't have their own offices, and that would go right the way through the organisation. And again, one of the discussions we've been having is that actually we think it should start with the senior leadership team, that role modelling we think is really important. It's very difficult, it's a very different way of working, and I think it's absolutely essential that the leadership team role model that to others.
Thank you. Really, really reassuring what you've said, Debbie. My second point is, and this is to Karen, and I'm sure you're doing it, but it's just to emphasise on page 63 are the challenges of working from home, and you probably know them off by heart. And there are some serious numbers here. Okay, so I think that we as a Scrutiny Management Board would be looking to see methods, ways of mitigating each of these issues, because the other people have made the point. Technology, isolation, not working long hours because I just keep on going. Okay, to reduce work-life balance. All of these are important factors that can, I'm not saying make or break it, but certainly could not make it as effectively implemented if we didn't recognise and come up with answers to those. So that's just a point that I'm sure is on the agenda, but I think OSMB want to emphasise that.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Great. Okay, anybody else want to speak?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay, so what we've got is a recommendation whereby we, having considered the attached report, do we determine whether the board supports the recommendation to the executive? On the one hand, we have agreed additional comments to be passed on, which have been captured by Democratic Services. So essentially, we're looking to support the recommendation to the executive as set out in the report. Do we have a mover and a seconder?
Chairman.
Yeah, I got Jackie. Jackie hand went up first, and then next to her on my screen is Angela. So if those two, proposer and seconder.
Yeah.
Okay, can we all indicate in favour? Nick and Nigel, is that everybody? Any abstentions?
That's me, Chairman.
That's great. That motion has been passed. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Really good. And thank you as well. Lovely. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye. So we move on from item 9 to item 10. Quickly taking over. Performance of the support services contract. This is something that we've learned to live with for many years. Sophie Reid is presenting. So,
thank you.
Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not actually presenting the report, but I would like, that's going to be on, but I would like to introduce it to you. It's the usual report, as you say, you receive this quarterly. This time we weren't able to bring it to you because the relevant OSMB had been cancelled. So the report covers a much wider period of time than usual. It covers December to September. It looks at the impact of COVID on the delivery of Serco's services, but is still in the standard form. It identifies that within the CSC there has been some issues in relation to the abandon rate in children's services, and also more recently in terms of adults. And no doubt after the presentation it might be that you have some questions around those service areas. Kevin Hales, the Operations Director from Serco, is here. He will present to you the highlights from Serco's perspective during the period we're looking at. A highlight for me, which I ought to mention to OSMB because of your engagement, and which isn't covered in the report, you will recall that in June of last year, carried out a scrutiny exercise on whether or not the council's contract with Serco should be extended a further time to 2024. You was generally supportive of that, and I can confirm that last week we did finalise the legal documents around that in accordance with the commercial offer that OSMB scrutinised for us. So that for me is a very positive step forward. And if I could just now pass over to Arnd, who will introduce the report, not introduce the report, will present the report.
Thank you. That's Sophie. Arnd. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. So as Sophie's already mentioned, this report covers a longer period than it normally does. So you'll recall that normally you see 6 months worth of data, which usually has the last 3 being new to the report on account of it being a quarterly report. So I've included all of the performance since we last presented this report. So you've got 10 months worth of data here. A key thing to point out, and as Sophie's already mentioned, is obviously there have been some significant changes as a result of COVID. And one of the key things I'd like to point out is that early on we agreed with Serco, following government guidance, and to allow Serco maximum flexibility and ability to respond to our requests, was to grant a blanket mitigation for all services for the period March to June. And if you look at table 1, you'll see there's a grey box which demonstrates that there was no amber or red performance to be achieved because we granted mitigation. The thing that you might be particularly interested in, as you can see when you look at the blue line for mitigation, is that during that period there was an increase in the number of KPIs that attracted mitigation, but they were still relatively few in comparison to the normal level of mitigations, if I can call it that, and the total number of KPIs. A further point of interest for the board is that because of the blanket mitigation, implicit in that is no need to report at all what the performance is, but Serco continued to report all KPIs throughout the period, the heightened period of COVID and since. So we actually have had figures for all of the KPI performance, which is particularly helpful. As you'll recall previously, this board agreed to review the performance of the Serco contract only in terms of exceptions, and therefore I've laid it out here. The only exceptions are mitigation, and to make it a little bit clearer, I've split that mitigation table into 2, so you can see those items that are in mitigation, which have perhaps been in mitigation for a long term and were not particularly as a result of COVID, and a second table which specifically identifies those that were directly affected as a result of COVID. So in table 2.1, you will see the adult care finance KPIs, and these have been in long-term mitigation for reasons previously explained, mostly to do with the systems that are not fully operational yet. The impact of these has been not to impact service provision particularly, and so as a general rule, it doesn't prevent good service. It is a reporting feature that is mainly not available to the council. We have a path to green for these, and there has been some progress since the last report. Notably that KPI 3 and 4 have been subject to review and we're about to go into a review of those following the policy that has changed since the 1st of April in the way that financial assessments are conducted, and to change the number of days that financial assessments need to be completed within. There are a few areas to note here, which is that performance generally was good, and the majority of performances were within the 28-day target. There has been a slight drop since COVID began. In ACF KPI 10, there has been progress against the systems, notably that as a result of the finance project, the phased introduction of services paid through Mosaic 2 are now available through Mosaic. 1 is community supported living finance and direct payments. So those are steps that have been taken there. On the next page, 2 further ones that have been in not long term but have been the subject of mitigation for some period are both in the CSC. So it's a number of contacts through digital access channels. You'll remember from the last time I reported this, the speed at which digitisation, that is to say the opportunities for members of the public to contact by digital means, has not progressed as quickly as it was first envisaged when the contract was conceived, and at the beginning of the contract, an escalating target was established that would gradually ratchet up the percentage of contacts that would be digital. However, for various reasons, and most notably the delays in the Avaya system, Serco have not been able to keep up with the requirement of the KPI, not because of anything that they've done, but simply because it hasn't panned out in the way that we had first anticipated. So we're looking at a revised KPI, and this has been agreed and has been included within the second extension that Sophie mentioned earlier. CSC KPI 09, the number of assessments completed on time. Again, I reported this previously. This is actually an interesting one because although it has involved, if you want a better word, KPI failure, the actual truth is that as a result of a request we made to comply with the CARE Act, a new triage process was established, which has in fact had the effect of improving the customer experience. And as a result of that, we don't consider this to be of particular concern. However, an improved and revised KPI that better matches the requirements of the triage is currently in draft form. Moving on to the second table. So these are KPIs which we don't normally see particular difficulty with, but have been affected by the COVID crisis. And notably here is CSE KPI 04. These are the abandoned calls, so calls where callers did not get through and gave up. As you would expect, as a result of the COVID crisis, and particularly an increase in demand, the effect of abandon is to go up. So the more callers you have, the more likely it is that they will ring off. And so we have had an increase in the number of callers ringing off. As an overall headline for all calls to the CSE, we have a target of 7%, that is 7% abandoned call rate. and a minimum service level of 10%. So that's what we would consider the lowest acceptable standard. So just for your interest, between the period of June to September, that rate was 11.15%. So it's not enormously missed, it is missed by a small margin. However, within that, there are some particular changes, most notably in children's services and adult services, where there has been a particular increase in call volumes. And also, something else of interest is that the average handling time for each call has gone up significantly. So it isn't just that calls are more frequent and there are more of them, but also that each one takes longer to process. And multiplying those two things together has a significant impact on the ability for the existing resource to respond. And therefore, some of these areas have experienced considerable changes in the abandoned rate. Noting that in children's services, we have seen an improving picture. So this is a service where the abandoned rate reached quite a high level at 27% in the middle of September, but has now fallen, and the children's abandoned rate as at week commencing the 19th of October is now 2.42%, which is a considerable improvement. And attention is now turning to the adults team, where there's also been a high rate of abandonment, but again is improving. In both areas, Serco have recruited additional staff to deal with this. And further to that, a number of staff who've been on long-term sick are also due to return to the service shortly. And this will make a significant difference to the ability of the service to respond to calls. On the next page, there are three further and the three final KPIs that have been affected by the COVID crisis, and they're all in the IMT area. As you know, the customer service centre and IMT are the two areas where there's been the greatest impact as a result of COVID. And in the case of IMT, there are, again, quite narrow misses here. So we've got IMT2, which is the priority incident resolution time. Here there is a target service level of 1 can be missed and up to 5 for the minimum service level. And for each of the 3 months in March to May, there were 2 incidents missed, which is a technical fail. However, not surprising given the pressures at that time, particularly March to May. So you'll note also that that one has now recovered and has been green for the period June to September. So no further concern there. IMT KPO 9, this is the service request fulfillment KPI. Well, we all know there was a massive rollout of home working, remote working, which Serco supported us with. It was a very successful support. However, as you would expect, it was also accompanied by a very significant spike in the number of service requests from users as they established their home working situations. And some staff did indeed experience some delay in their resolutions dealt with. However, just again, for your interest, the target service level is 95% and the minimum service level 85%, and the average achievement rate for March to September, the entire period, is 82.78%. So it isn't catastrophic, it is a reasonable miss given the circumstances. Service requests, the most recent position on the number of service requests coming in is, and Serco's response was, they're stabilising to tolerable levels. So in July, they were at 2,000 a month, and now the most recent one in September was at 1,650. IMT KPI 14 are Windows end user devices patched. So this KPI concerns itself with making sure that individual users have the most up-to-date software, etc., on their devices. And there's an obligation to make sure they are patched within 21 days of the release of a new software upgrade, for instance. Now, this is a key one because it requires connectivity. So in order for a patch to happen, it has to be connected to the council's network. And with so many people being out and about and not erratically connected to the council's network, it hasn't been possible to fully achieve that goal during the period March to September. Again, the average achievement rate was 89.02% against a minimum service level of 90. So it is a very close miss of the minimum service level. So again, quite an impressive performance when all things are taken into consideration. Moving on to trend analysis, you will recall in the past we've talked about having seen a considerable improvement in the performance of the Serco contract and considerably fewer amber and red incidents. One of the things that you asked us to do is to review the performance of the green KPIs. So although KPIs might be succeeding and meeting the target service level, we were asked to consider and report whether we felt there were any particular ones of note that we would want to point to say, might be green, but this could be heading for trouble. We would put it in those sort of terms. And the current position is, in fact, a considerably improved position. So those KPIs which have continued to perform green, even those that would have been given mitigation had that been necessary, the overall position is that 87% of the KPIs currently at green status are in a stable or improving state. And none of them give cause concern, and none of them are likely on the current trajectory to fall below the target service level before the end of the contract in 2024. And this is quite an improvement because in November 19, the position was 68% of those were stable or improving. Also, a regular feature of this report is the number of abatement points. So that is to say where Serco have been received a penalty for the missing a KPI target. And it's described here, and I won't go through the whole thing because you're familiar with it. However, just as a quick reminder again, some of this reporting period service credits were suspended because of mitigation offered. And so therefore, there wouldn't have been any abatement points. So I've included the table, which I haven't updated because none have been awarded since February 2020. So there have been no abatement points, both because of mitigation and also during other times when they could have been, because there were no red or amber performance KPIs since. There in fact haven't been any since October 2019. So concluding this report, the general picture is one of very good performance overall during the review period. So some KPIs that were in previously mitigation, we know about them, they're receiving attention, they are a matter of priority, particularly around financial assessments. And we, as mentioned already, COVID-related mitigation and accompanying that, the suspension of service credits. Just as a reminder again that the reason we gave the suspensions was because of the government's procurement policy note 02020, supplier relief due to COVID-19. So a directive given to all local authorities. We didn't act alone. This was in line with other authorities' actions. We got a very positive response from Serco as a result of that, which gave them the flexibility and ability to direct their services and their performance into the key areas wherever they cropped up for a rapid response. They also helped to set up some key things, clearly the community helpline, the COVID lines, we called it, where a great many contacts were made, and also the click and tip service for the waste sites, and further to that, the library's click and collect service also. As I mentioned before, the majority of KPIs continue to be delivered at and above TSL. And another critical thing of note for the board is that all of Serco's services continued to be provided and have continued to be provided throughout the COVID crisis. So at no time was a service shut down or terminated as a result of an inability to deliver the service or a lack of staffing or resource. So that's a particularly commendable point. So as I've already touched on, in terms of our 4 key services that the contract provides, IMT and the CSE were significantly affected. IMT has been reported separately, or notwithstanding the KPIs I mentioned earlier. PM was largely unaffected in terms of KPI performance, and finance, the change there was they experienced a reduction in the number of debtor accounts, which reduced the number of accounts being handled by Serco. There was no specific impact as a result of that. So in terms of the CSE, really the key thing is, as I've mentioned, is that the number of contacts received by the CSE increased rapidly from the beginning of the crisis. And just to give you a bit of an example of that, as mentioned, a dedicated COVID line was established very quickly and became active very quickly. It handled 23,187 COVID-related calls between the 1st of April and the 30th of June. It continues to be active, but that was a peak period, and that was an additional cost to the council of £228,000. Something to bear in mind, though, is that we will be claiming that against the funding that was mentioned previously, but there was also a significant decrease in the number of business as usual contacts into the service centre. So because of the closure of libraries, registrars' offices and others, we received considerably fewer calls relating to those. So in some regards, those calls were replaced by the COVID calls. The overall effect on the CSE budget was not a significant spike, and it remains on track as at now. So that's about it, lightning tour through the situation, and I'll hand you over to Kevin now for a further comment from Serco.
Thank you. Well,
hi all. I'm just going to keep it fairly brief, to be honest, because I think Anne's touched on the majority of areas that are particularly relevant. I think from a Serco perspective, year 19-20, the performance over the years 2019-2020 showed a kind of marked improvement in our performance levels. I think it was probably our strongest ever year in terms of KPI performance and delivery. We had a handful of penalties over that year, and we was heading into kind of the new 2020-2021 period with quite a bit of optimism in terms of continued kind of performance improvements moving forward. I think, as with any organisation, COVID had quite an impact on that, and I guess that kind of brings on to the other area that we're particularly proud of, which was our response to COVID and how we were able to kind of work in partnership with LCC to support your needs. And the 20th, I mean, I think there was 10,000 inbound calls, 20,000 outbound calls, dealing with Lincolnshire's vulnerable people, which we're particularly proud we were able to support. So all of that activity was something we were particularly proud of. And likewise, the COVID activity we delivered around IT, moving from an agile state of allowing 300 devices online at any one point to 4,000 plus was a huge step forward and took an incredible amount of work. I think there's, with anything of that magnitude in terms of the movement, there were clearly some teething problems with that, but hopefully we're coming out the other end of that now, and generally people across the council are able to work with the right level of IT equipment, and it's made a real difference to supporting you guys. So I think yeah, just generally quite positive and quite proud of our workforce and how they've managed to deliver just like yours throughout this COVID crisis over the previous year. So I think it's just generally proud of that, really.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Could I just ask Debbie as CX to say something just about abandoned calls, because we did discuss it briefly, but just recently.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, with regard to the customer service centre and the answering of calls for both the children's line and the adults line, there has been an increase in the number of calls. So there's been an increase in in demand, and unfortunately that has led to some particular challenges and an increase in the abandon rate call. The Serco staff, because of the volume of call and also because of some staffing challenges, have struggled to keep pace with that demand. We've worked really closely on an action plan. We've worked really closely on amending the business processes to actually try and cope with that increased demand. Pleased to say that the impact on children's is showing significant improvements. So there is a comprehensive action plan. LCC are providing some additional support and capacity to be able to work as a team collectively, and both the new processes and the additional capacity are having a significant impact on children's, which is really positive. And we're just about to sign off an action plan on an exit strategy so that it can become much more self-sufficient. And then again, comprehensive action plan about what we're doing around adults. That hasn't yet filtered into operational practice, so still the calls are taking longer to be answered than what we would want in adults, but we're confident that the plan that we've worked together on will begin to have an impact very soon.
Thank you. And thanks, Anne. Thanks, Kevin. Right, Ray, questions?
Chairman, I've got no questions so far.
Right. Okay. Have you got one, or could I?
Chairman, Councillor Rob Kendrick's just come up.
Right. Councillor Kendrick. Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. Unsurprisingly, obviously, the point to do with children's services caught my eye, although Debbie has sort of clarified the position on that. Although I do note that one line referred to long-term absences in children's services that was impacting on this. I don't know whether Debbie can say anything on that one as to how far we're getting to resolve that situation.
I can take that if you want, Debbie.
Yeah, Kevin's probably got the detail.
Ah, thank you,
Kevin.
So some of the challenges around staffing. So I'll cover off the wider staffing challenges that Serco faced. I think when COVID kicked off, we redeployed staff to deal with COVID and volumes dropped elsewhere. And I think we probably, in hindsight, misjudged some of that in the sense that what we did at that time was pause some training on new starters in children's and adults, and it was the right decision at the time, or it felt the right decision at the time in terms of priority, but it caught us out in terms of our backfill ability. So when we lost staff to sickness, we had a couple of staff off sick. I think working from home impacted that. There was a couple of COVID cases, but that was by no means the majority. Much of the majority as it's a difficult, sensitive area to work in, and some of our staff occasionally did struggle with that and have to take time off. And we kind of grappled with that for a while. I think that's the reason the council helped us and give us some additional support in terms of resource and capacity whilst we dealt with that. And much of the action plan that Debbie refers to is around the training of new resource. So we've taken on up to, I think, 10 new staff that we're currently having trained. Children's in particular has got quite a lengthy, because of the sensitivity of the types of calls, it's got quite a lengthy training period, which we've redesigned the entire training package so we can bring staff in and get them up to the right levels quicker. So I think we're in a much more resilient place moving forward, as Debbie references in terms of our exit plan, but certainly absence and kind of our lack of ability to backfill resource quickly contributed to the challenges we face there.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Any questions yet, Ray?
Yes, Councillor Angela Newton wishes to speak.
Lovely. Angela.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really a comment more than a question. I personally find this very good reading after chairing the Value for Money Committee for several years, when I nearly used to dread the report, a similar report from Serco. So I'm really pleased to see Kevin here this morning and other people, and that we've really got a positive, some positive statements and I'd like to thank the company and for what they've done during COVID. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Angela. I can remember value for money very well. Right. Ray.
No further questions, Chairman.
Okay, I've got a question to ask, which is on page 71, and I know this is going back in time and history, and I know the implementation of Mosaic has not been one of the great success stories, but if we look at the two KPIs that are affected by Mosaic on page 71 about assessment in relation to adult care, I wonder if we could just have a brief explanation on whether or not we're going to be looking at how we got ourselves into a position where we had to mitigate almost from the very beginning of the Serco contract, okay, as a result of issues to do with Mosaic implementation, which extends into the current era, which is 2020. So for 5 years, we've been in that situation, and I wonder how we came, perhaps historically, to get into that situation, and whether or not it's going to be resolved as a result of other things. So, and I know relatively new, Kevin, but you know, can you tell us something about something that says a particular KPI, and let's emphasise the word key performance indicator, has been in mitigation for 4 years. Toss a coin.
Sorry, did you want to pitch in? It's a long-standing position that the council found itself in, having with the two systems, Mosaic and Abacus, were systems that existed at the time of the commencement of the contract and were due for review for various technical progress. I don't know what those technical
Okay.
But sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think we ought to make it clear that Serco have still been measured against that target, but the target levels have been reduced to reflect the fact that LCC weren't able to follow through on the commitment it made in the original contract document in 2014.
Okay, right. That sums it up. Perhaps there's a discussion outside the meeting, but thank you for that.
And sorry, Mr. Chairman, we are certainly looking at revising that KPI so that it can reflect the new policy and Serco can be held to account for it. I think it might be worth saying that I think everyone, both within Serco and the council, have come to the view that that 15 business day target was probably never realistic, and which was another reason why the achievement against it was dropped, particularly given the failure to have Mosaic working as we said it would.
Yeah, I think that's fair stuff. I think that said, I think recent performance is moving towards that direction. Whether it ever gets to 15 days is a different matter. But in the last 12 months, the policy has made a step change in performance there. But there's some further innovation with some tools like Looking Local and some Lagan product around workflow that we're working on that will make further improvements. So it is absolutely an improving picture. We have always reported on it. As to whether the target was originally achievable is probably one for another day.
Okay, if we park the past and look at the future, when are we going to have a target that can be agreed between both parties that people like us can measure performance against?
So we can show performance, we're tracking performance, we can measure performance on a regular basis and show where that is. In terms of a target, I think this COVID is a genuine issue for us at the minute in this space, where our volumes are quite erratic in this space, and we're trying to, at the minute, things like your Looking Local rollout are delayed. We're not pushing online tooling out of your social workers at present because it's just not quite the right time to do that. So there's some ongoing activities that will make a serious difference. So my view would be kind of towards the middle of next year, if not earlier, we should be able to get to a realistic target. I think before that, understanding the impact of COVID would make it a challenge.
Okay. Ray, did you put your hand up?
I didn't, no, Chairman.
Sorry, okay. Right, well, I think that calls for discussion outside this meeting. Okay, fine. Okay, does anybody else want to make any points about anything that's in Arndt and Kevin's report?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay, so we're asked to seek assurance about the performance of the Corporate Support Services contract, lots of positives about KPIs that are met, and provide feedback and challenge as required. I think we've done that broadly, very strongly supportive, with just a couple of questions that have been raised. So I think we've taken those actions. Is that agreed that we accept what we've done? If we could indicate, please. Okay, everybody okay, Ray?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
All in favour, that's carried, Chairman.
Sorry, say again, Nigel.
That's carried, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of you and Sophie as well for presenting the paper in the first place. Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, just quickly moving on. Item 11 is the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board work programme, which is for information only. So you're just being asked to receive it. So you've received it. Okay. Fine. That's the end, as I see it, of the meeting. So thank you, everybody. Sorry, Ray. Did you put your hand up? No,
I didn't.
Sorry.
No.
Okay, so thank you, everybody, for attending. We've got through some pretty important business, from COVID to the transformation programme to smarter working and the Corporate Support Services contract. So thank you for taking part. Okay, see you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chairman.